Hey, this is Bill Coletti. I am excited to have this conversation with Phil. I run a crisis communications and reputation management firm, and we're at our best when we find organizations are at their worst. And so, love to have a conversation about crisis readiness. How can you become crisis confident? But I also want to talk about how people can become trusted advisors so that you don't need crisis communicators like me to be firefighters when necessary.
So Bill, there's no crisis going on, man. I don't know why we're talking about this. I mean, everything is hunky dory, right?
Absolutely. The world is easy and better, and 2020 looks nothing like 2022. And I'm sure 2021 it fits somewhere in between.
Yeah. No, I mean, I would say we're kind of always in crisis to a certain extent, right? I mean, something is always happening, something's always changing, something is unexpected. But you talk about trusted advisors. So what's a trusted advisor, Bill, and why is that so important?
Yeah. So let's first of all just do definitions. What are we talking about on a
Yeah.
crisis? Yes, we are all living in a COVID. Maybe we're in post COVID. I don't know where we are, but we are all living in a crisis of global proportions that we're all having to deal with. What I sort of define crisis as in a corporate context for the people that we work with, higher education, major corporations, businesses have strategies and plans, and businesses have weekly, quarterly, annual goals. A crisis that I'm talking about is something that takes you off of that plan. So you have to focus on something else. Now, COVID clearly did that. Think about an industrial accident. Think about sexual harassment in the C-suite. Think about a product recall. So that's the context that what we're talking about. Being a trusted advisor to me is when you're in that moment, in that space of crisis, a leadership team, a CEO, a board of directors, general counsel, chief operating officer, there is only a handful of seats that are at that table making decisions about what to do next. Someone that has the responsibility and understands the voice of the public, because when you think about reputation, is that a company owns its brand, but it's the public that owns its reputation. Someone that is thinking about that needs to be at the table. Too often, the communicators, because they don't have the facts and precedents that the legal folks have, they don't have the spreadsheets and charts that the accountants have, they don't have the subject matter expertise that the operational guys have, are often left out. We as communicators need to level up to become trusted advisors so that leaders say, your discipline, the thing you excel at, is helping us explain what's going on to the public and protecting our reputation. So we want to help people become trusted advisors to actually help lead organizations so you don't need me.
Okay, so where does that sit, Bill? Because then organizations I've been part of, I've seen marketing and communications. Well,
Yep.
marketing and communications, I don't know that they're the same thing at all. And then other organizations, I see that it doesn't exist even at all. Like there is no such thing as a communications team. So where should this be, Bill?
So I'm agnostic on the org chart. I'm agnostic on where it fits because I've seen a B2B, or excuse me, a B2C company where the marketers are all about the brand, pushing the product, the experience, really robust sales organizations that are just that they're just like on rails with getting that message out. Then I've seen a B2B context where reputation really matters, where reputation is really corporate reputation. It really matters. So I don't know. I don't have a prescribed solution. It usually fits somewhere in that marketing and communications function. I've got a basic theory about American corporations is that you've got makers and sellers. Every job in an American corporation fits into one of those categories. And so the makers are obviously the people that make the product or make the service or deliver the service is that then, and then there, that's also where, all of your general counsel and administration and contracting, those are the makers. And then the sellers are just people out talking about it. And so I think there should be somebody in the organization Could be the CEO, could be in the general counsel's office. So I'm really agnostic, but I think it really focuses on somebody thinking about reputation. I'd like for there to be one person. Depends on the size and scale of the organization, but generally in that marketing space is where it sort of fits.
Okay. Okay, so reputation. So is this a new thing, Bill? Is this happened as a result of COVID or as a result of something, or has this always been something that companies have had to be aware of?
I think it's always been something they've had to been aware of. I mean, companies made contributions to the United Way because it was a good thing, and that's been going on as long as the United Way existed. And so that concept of giving back to the community of, Chico's bail bonds and the Bad News Bears, I mean, that's some element of corporate reputation. So it's been around for a while. I think what COVID's changed is COVID has really put clarity around the CEO or the leader's role and responsibility to communicate, to always be communicating, to explain the unexplainable, to explain the unknown. And so I don't think that the necessity of having a strong reputation is critical. I think it is created new tactics because a lot of CEOs have been reluctant to always be communicating. But I think COVID has shown us that they need to do that. I also think there was a transformational point around Black Lives Matter, is that I think that was also transformational for a lot of organizations, is that we've got to talk about something we typically never had to really talk about unless we were, sort of an enlightened company. So I think both of those events have sort of changed the game.
That's interesting. Wow, that's super interesting, Bill. So always be communicating. But Black Lives Matter, COVID was maybe more external. Black Lives Matter more internal? Yes, no, I don't know. I'm just curious. What are the thoughts on that?
I think they're both there. So I talk about this context around social risk. I think we are, if anybody that has any sort of operational background in a corporation understands that there's risk. There's financial risk, political risk, trade risk, all kinds of various risks. And we can factor and we can hedge that with insurance, or we can do various and sundry things around risk. I think there's this issue called social risk. And what I mean by social risk is that these are risks or issues that impact populations. They impact groups of people. COVID's kind of an existential risk because it impacted all of us, but it impacted us as parents. It impacted us as employees. It impacted us as leaders in lots of different ways. Black Lives Matter is a social risk because it clearly impacted, an African-American community. I think LGBTQ issues, that's significant. That's impact on a particular population. And now I think what we're going to see in politics is this issue around, I think abortion. And I think we're going to be the impact that it has on population. So this context of social risk is corporations are being forced to say things. And even in sales conversations, people are being asked, hey, where do you guys stand on this? Or what are your thoughts about that? And okay, that has nothing to do with features and benefits, but I'm being asked about it. And so that's why companies need to have positions and think through these things, back to your question, that are all fundamentally external, but may need to be communicated internally, because getting employee alignment is critical.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so critical. So that's interesting because I would think that previously to this, like you said, companies they'd remain agnostic, right? They didn't talk about this stuff. They'd
Not
be
my
like,
lane.
No, that's a third rail, right? That's going to drive people away from us. And now
Yes.
I think we expect that these companies, that these CEOs take a position, even if it's not a popular one, but take a position and are able to defend that. So how do we get employees aligned there? I mean, I know this isn't exactly what you do, but I'm just curious, do you have some thoughts around how we make sure that employees, who frankly are probably more passionate than the CEO is about this, because it impacts them probably more directly than it impacts a CEO that's making 100x what the employee is. How do we communicate that, Bill, to make sure that we have that alignment?
So you repeated it back. ABC, always be communicating. I think it is incumbent on leaders to articulate a position and articulate what we stand for. And so rooting back to crisis, and you're not far off. This is why this is really important. I think the key differentiator between good and great crisis communications is speed. You got to be fast. You got to be fast in a crisis. But it's not fast for fast sake or speed for speed's sake. It comes from mission and values. This is what we stand for, plus an understanding a chain of command, who's in the room, all that trusted advisor stuff. That's what makes you fast. If leaders have not articulated their mission and values, what do they stand for? What really matters most to us as an organization? You are going to be slow in your response. Okay, so take an industrial organization. All right, an industrial organization has a bad product. Bad product gets out in the marketplace and people die. So let's talk about it in a B2B context. Bad product, people die. You've got a sales force that is like, well, it's all about the economic relationship. So my lead message is going to be about rebates, discounts, and getbacks. Or the thing that really matters is that we are devastated that this has happened, and we're going to do whatever's necessary in order to fix this situation. That conviction comes from the top of the organization. And so that's just one example. You may get asked in a sales context, you may get asked as your people are meeting with customers, so where are you guys on the environment? Where are you guys relative to Black Lives Matter? To your point, companies, there is an expectation that people have answer. And you've been in these sales conversations. And if you get asked that question some years ago, you could say, I don't know. It's not something we've talked about. Now people will push back and say, are you serious, Phil? You guys have not talked about these critical issues of the day? That's normal. Buyers are doing that now, and that's new. And unless the leader always communicating, and I don't, again, video, email, tweet, whatever venue they choose, but they need to be talking about the things that matter most and to the audiences that matter most. And that's that mission and values, because when it breaks, when something happens, they need to be fast. The best way to be fast is not for me to first step to explain to you what I think about Black Lives Matter. It's to say, remember that memo I sent you in March? We're thinking about that, or we're talking about that, or that's what we think about now. So it's always having a position, always be communicating on these issues.
Yeah, instead of explaining, just be reinforcing
Totally.
the message that's there, which is so often not done by CEOs. I mean, they think they do it, but I talked about it at the annual meeting, Bill. Isn't that enough? And you're saying it's not. So how do I balance my job if I'm a C-suite executive, right? How do I make sure that that we're plowing ahead here, that I've got a 10-year vision to cast, with the need to always be communicating? And maybe part of that is also attracting new employees, because we're in the middle of a great resignation here where people are like, dude, I don't like you and I'm not going to work for you. I'm not even going to apply at your stupid company.
Yeah. Yeah. So it goes back to this concept of who matters most. So I hope that leaders are having conversations as a part of an annual planning meeting, is that they're having conversation. And I hope they're asking a question, who really matters most? All right. I do not think, and I do not want anybody to be confused, I'm not saying CEOs need to be all things to all people on all topics. Okay, that is not it. Now, it is completely legitimate that a company doesn't need to have a position on abortion. Okay, that's just something that easily doesn't need to be talked about. But these other issues that are topical, and you just read the paper, organizations need to recognize that they're there. But the answer to your question about what do CEOs focus on is they need to have a focal point around who matters most. And there's a handful. It's communities, customers, and critics. And they need to pick a handful, one or two, in each of those and make some tough decisions. Communities, it's about my employees, or it's about my shareholders, or it's about my customers. All right. So, and that's really what. And then within my customers, I'm going to focus on my big customers or my growing customers, or I'm going to focus on my legacy customers. So those are decisions. Who matters most? And then critics, who am I going to listen to? I put Congress, the media, regulators, I put them in the sort of that critics bucket. So communities, customers, and critics are sort of these three focal point. You need to pick very specifically for you and your organization who matters most to you in those categories. And then as you go through the year communicating, find vehicles and mechanisms in order to do that. Annual conference, if that's what it's all about, because you're trying to talk to shareholders and you really only get their attention span then, or when you do, if you're a publicly traded company, at a quarterly meeting or a quarterly briefing, maybe that's the venue. If you're trying to talk to broad-based customers, I was watching a news show about the CEO of AMC, the movie. Okay, he is the prototypical, relatively large, 65-year-old executive of a big movie chain. All right. He's tweeting up a storm. He writes about all kinds of stuff on Twitter. And he said, in the interview, he said, I never thought I would ever be doing this, but it is amazing feedback. It is amazing for me to be able to tell our story. They made a conscious decision that that's more important than the Goldman Sachs Roadshow. And they made a decision about that stuff. And so I think it is focus on communities, customers, and critics. Who matters most? Don't need to be all things to all people, and then just focus on talking about these reputational issues.
Awesome. I love that you did not say that there is a channel that they must be on, because that is so often missed, right? Like, oh, you've got to be on TikTok. Well, no, not necessarily. I mean, if your audience is there that you're focused on, awesome, right, to your point, absolutely, let's do that. But if not, well, maybe not so much. So that's instructive. So, let's dig a little bit on. That's an interesting point about the AMC group, right? That's on Twitter. Mm-hmm. That CEO that's there. That's short form communications. Mm-hmm. And typically CEOs write memos. Mm-hmm. They write missives, right? Oh my gosh, this is War and Peace, and nobody understands it unless you have an interpreter on high. And now we're going bang right to the consumer. Mm-hmm. How do we help shift the mindset of these CEOs that are like, well, I don't know. I don't know that, I know that my customers are important, but I'm not really comfortable with this. I mean, can they hire a translator? I mean, is there someone that they can help make this more sensible, Bill? Or how does this work for those that are old and uncomfortable? And I use old and uncomfortable in air quotes here.
I understand. Yeah. Man, we need to reform our educational system is what we need to do. And the way we I mean, if you want the macro answer, the incentives in grad school, or the incentives early in our career, even if you didn't go to grad school or get your MBA, the incentive is long and thoughtful. That's where we get rewarded when you put together the package or the presentation, whether in an MBA program or beyond, as an internship. That's where you get rewarded. The incentive is not around free form, quick thought. That's there. So I think the incentives need to change because the marketplace has changed. The marketplace, to your point, nobody wants to read your 5-page manifesto. They might make your way through your tweet thread, if you will. But that's where it's always be communicating. Keep telling the story over and over and over again, repeating it in lots of different venues. So, for me, I guess you could outsource it, but that's over-indexing on Twitter. I think video is a great venue. Now, there are some CEOs that, have a face for radio. Because that's maybe where they should be. But it is go into the conversation with the recognition I need to do something, and I got to figure out where I can do it best. Now, maybe I'm not good in that fast. That's just not how I think. So maybe we can find a different venue, or maybe there's someone else in the organization who can do it. The point is, it's not how it gets done. It's who does it. How are we going to tell this story and to do it the right way?
Well, and that it gets done as well, right?
Yes,
that it actually happens. Let's be clear. It's got to happen. Even if you're not comfortable, even if you don't love it, it's still got to be done, because to your point earlier, if you're explaining, you're losing. You have to be reinforcing at the point. So the levee breaks, Bill. Oh my gosh, we're in crisis, man. And I have not listened to you, Bill. I have not. I'm not fast. Well, now what do I do? How do I recover when the shit hits the fan?
Yeah. So you hope that you've built up a history and have some semblance of a reservoir of goodwill, so that you get the benefit of the doubt at the outset. That someone says, well, hey, that's not Phil Incorporated that I know, that and the levee breaks, or whatever the example is. You hope that you have that. If you don't, the fastest thing to do it in that situation is acknowledge there's a problem, articulate a plan forward on how you're going to fix it, and get everybody back to normal as quickly as you can. And so it's own it, communicate about it, and stabilize as quickly as possible. Sort of this equivocation of sort of wobbling around and saying, well, maybe it was him, or maybe it was them, or I didn't really own the levee, or it rained too much that day. So I think the reality is, the folks, if the question is, how do I get out of this as fast as I can, the solution is own it, fix it, and move on as quickly as possible.
And that's doable. That's something
It is.
organizations can do, right? I mean, that's
Absolutely.
and that's helpful, right? So the ownership, though, well, that's often a tender balance, right, between ownership and responsibility. I still don't want to get sued here, Bill. I'm
Yeah.
worried that it's going to look like it's my fault. So can you give me maybe a gentle way that we own it without assuming responsibility?
Yeah. So that's that great litigation argument, and there is this old saw that we, the corporation, should not acknowledge fault for anything, because there's the potential we could get sued. I think you go into the reality, sadly, is that you are going to get sued. All right, that you are going to get sued, and it is inevitability. And in my conversations with both, plaintiffs bar, defense attorney, corporate defense attorneys, both of them, they would rather not have to depose someone that actually said, yes, this happened, we're looking into it, we're getting to the bottom of it, and we're going to fix it, but I know you've been harmed, I know you've been impacted, and I'm a good citizen, and here's what I'm going to try to do, as opposed to stiff arming every step of the way. I think that there is a real belief that if we think, well, if I don't say anything, I might not get sued. I think that is a fallacy, and I would much rather be on the side of showing a little bit of empathy and a little bit of understanding. I don't need to, mea culpa if it wasn't really my fault. Obviously, be guarded in that space, but I think expressing some empathy and understanding, critically important for organizations. You're going to get sued, and I'd rather be on the table and say, well, why did you say that? I said that because somebody got hurt, and I wanted to try to see if I could make it better. Well, does that mean you're at fault? No. That just means somebody got hurt, and I'm trying to make it better. Human.
Yeah. Right? And that's
Yeah.
really what we want from our leadership, right? If I think of a trusted advisor, it gets back to your first point. There's someone that I trust and that I get advice from, but also that I believe is a human being, that when they screw up, not if they screw up, they're going to own it and they're going to try to make it better, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about it, as we go here. So Bill, folks are like, oh boy, wow, there's a lot here to unpack. A lot of reputation stuff, a lot of social risk, the ability to always be communicating, super important. But where do we start, Bill? Like, where does an organization actually get started so that they can have this, so that they're not like, oh my gosh, this sucks, and now I'm screwed?
Yeah. Yeah. So, Phil, we're coming up onto the end of the year, and it's my understanding, I think it's true, it's my understanding that gym memberships like double and triple in January, or maybe even be even greater than that. And then by March, nobody's back at the gym, or just back to the regulars. And so, much like a journey of weight loss or improved fitness, it doesn't begin by running a marathon, and it doesn't begin by becoming a vegan on Monday morning. It begins by taking a step of acknowledging that my weight and my lack of cardiovascular health is important, and I'm going to do something about it. And it starts by taking a small walk. Now, I share that parable because it really fits with what organizations need to do. They need to realize that this is a long journey, but obviously, and great people have said, the long journey begins with one step. And so the first thing I would recommend that they do is pull out the newspaper or their trade publication and say, if this had happened to us, how would we respond? That is incredibly illuminating in its own right. So I would start there, simply saying, what if this would happen to us? That then starts unpacking a lot of different issues and concerns that people need to be thinking about. After that, you can do more complex risk audits, risk assessments, evaluations of your capacity. These are all things that we help organizations that we work with. But quite frankly, if you're just on that precipice of going on this journey of becoming crisis confident or going on this journey around reputation, much like diet and exercise, love your feedback if that metaphor makes sense. I'm not going to decide to run a marathon on Wednesday. I'm going to go put my shorts on and go take a step and walk maybe down my driveway. And that's the parable of, hey guys, what if this had happened to us? How would we respond? Basic steps first.
Yeah, I love that. I think taking the step first and acknowledging this is important, and then making the first few steps towards success absolutely makes sense. Diet and exercise, anything important to you, you have to acknowledge that this is important, and maybe find your why as well. And then I love your idea of that role playing, right? That kind of war gaming, if you will, as a prior service military person, right? We're always thinking about that because it could happen. It could happen to you. If you're in an organization, you're like, oh my goodness, what the heck do I do here? You have an opportunity now to think about what would I do here and to move forward from there. So, wow. So lots of awesome stuff, Bill. I super appreciate it. Kith.co is the website. KITH.co is where all of Bill's goodness is. But Bill, if people want to talk back with you and they want to have conversations and maybe go a little deeper, obviously they can go to the website. But where else should they go?
Yes, pretty active on LinkedIn. Just, Bill Coletti, Kith on LinkedIn, Twitter at B Coletti. On Twitter. Those are two platforms that I spend a lot of time on communicating. But gosh, man, I'm old fashioned, pick up the phone and give a call. I know nowadays that feels very, very intimate and vulnerable to pick up the phone, but gosh, I just love having a conversation. I try to be generous as we talk about this stuff.
Awesome. So find Bill on LinkedIn, find him on Twitter, or pick up the phone and call him. I make that offer on a lot of the interviews that I do as well, Bill, because I think it is so important. We get so much richness when we can actually have a conversation. If it's important to you, you'll pick up the phone and call. Again, Bill's at kith.co, that's KITH.co, or find him on LinkedIn or Twitter. And Bill, I so appreciate all you shared today. Thanks so much for the insight and for the acknowledgement that this absolutely is important and that we can get started with just a couple steps. Thanks, man.
That's great. Thank you.